Welcome back to the studio. Almost all of the work that I do on the long arm machine, which is a Bernina Q24, I utilize the IntelliQuilter digital quilting system. And today I'm going to be showing you how I load the information for the digital quilting pattern. I'm going to be using something called the IQ stick. It is basically a USB stick that has the application program for the IntelliQuilter on it that lets me run demonstrations on the computer. It wouldn't actually run the program for the robotics, but it does let me do demos on the computer to do demonstrations. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be doing it on the computer and then use a screen capture program. So I'm going to be showing you how we input the size of a design, how we select the design, and how we eliminate the gap in between the rows. Just the very basic beginning for those of you who might just be beginning in selecting designs and how that process works. So we're going to be going inside. It'll probably be a fairly quick video, but you'll be able to see up close and personal how that process works. When you want to load a new design onto a quilt, you're going to hit Design Sew Quilt at the main menu, Start New, and we're going to reset our project time. We're going to be using a Pantograph, and these two options are not available to us because we're not actually attached to the frame of the machine, so we can't mark on the quilt or trace on the quilt. Also, these two options are only available if the size you're marking is small enough that the head of your machine can move to mark those points. So if you're doing a twin size, a king size, you wouldn't be able to mark these points anyway. So generally I'm using enter rectangle manually. So I'm going to be doing a 60-inch wide by 80-inch long. And I'm going to hit continue. And you can see up here in the top, this rectangle represents the size of my quilt. So I'm going to hit finished. And I'm going to be using an Urban Elements pattern. So there are other pattern collections available, and these are going to come up alphabetically. Now I also have in my download files, all of these are also Urban Element files. I just haven't cleaned up my downloads and entered them into the Urban Elements folder yet. So these are also Urban Elements downloads that I haven't moved yet. But I'm going to move over to Urban Elements, and I'm just going to go through some of the designs, and I'll go to Aphrodite, and you'll see after the word Aphrodite I have the number 12. When I download a design, well actually you'll see numbers after most of the designs. When I download a design from Urban Elements, it has an inventory control number at the beginning of the file name. I always delete the inventory control number, and then I look up the design on the website and see how tall that design is. And then I add that number to the end of the name of the design. That way I know when I include the design on the IntelliQuilter how tall it was intended to be. So I'm going to click on Aphrodite. It was intended to be a 12-inch design. I'll hit continue, and we have to do this twice, once for the even and once for the odd rows. So you'll see we have even and odd rows here, and this white space in between is called the gap. And if we click on the gap, we have a couple ways of eliminating that space. We could hit the up and down buttons here, but the screen is a touch screen, so we could also just rub our finger diagonally on the screen and it eliminates the space in between. But while I'm doing that, notice here that it's also changing the pattern density and the size. So I'm going to continue until we get that to where there's really no gap in between. Then we're going to come back here, and the pattern height is what we want to get back to 12 inches, but it doesn't let you adjust pattern height directly. It's only letting you adjust row height. So you could either use the keyboard and punch in numbers, and I could punch in 8 as a guess, and that got me to 12.5, which was a pretty good guess. We could hit the minus number until we got to approximately 12, and again we could use the touch screen and just go at a diagonal until we get approximately 12 inches. And you're not always going to get exactly, but this one's pretty close, 12.039. So that was the intended design when the designer created this. And so you could zoom in and see what the design looks like, what the space in between looks like. And when you're finished, you can go ahead and hit finished. The transition is what happens at the edge of the quilt when the machine sews off and is going to sew back on to create the design. And generally what I use is a continuous design. If you were going to change that, you could hit the question mark. It explains the threshold and for changing that. But you could change it to jump stitches and tie-offs. If you were going to do jump stitches or tie-offs, you could see in this particular pattern there'd be 267 of those. I would rather just do continuous because it's going to be off of the quilt anyway, and so I would accept that. Once you commit to that, you're not going to be able to change that. So right now the design is ready to sew out on your quilt. So you could hit sew quilt. And I always like to use the Panto sequencing assistant. So if you select that, it's going to ask you to select the first pattern, which is always going to be the very top. So we're going to say OK. Select the very top patterns, and it's going to not be a complete row, so we'll hit continue. Panto sequencing assistance again. How do you want the rows quilted? I like to alternate them, so that means it's going to start on the left and so to the right. It's going to start here and end here. My machine is capable of sewing beautifully left to right and then right to left. You'll either learn that or you already know that. If yours only sews good in one direction, then you always want to have yours go in that direction. Mine does well both, so I can alternate. And I like to have it cut my threads and tie off at the end of each row. So I'll select tie off, and I'm going to sequence the entire quilt at the beginning. By doing this, if I have to stop in the middle of the quilt, I can just save my needle position and then pick up the next day with an existing project, and I don't have to worry about having lost my project. So I can select whole, and you can see every other row is a different color, and my start and end points are different on each row. So now I can hit preview and hit start, and you can see what this particular design would look like to sew out. You also can see here the total time for this entire project would be 191 minutes of actual sewing time. That does not include rolling up the quilt, realigning the quilt, any breaks, bathroom breaks, anything like that. That's just the actual machine sewing time. And this is the speed and details that I have my machine set at. Now, this is what would happen if I wanted to quit for the day. So do you want to save your current needle position? I would say yes. And I could go ahead and back out. And save it, and then I could go ahead and I could go back to my main menu and shut down the machine, and it would let me start from scratch in the morning. So I would just go to System and shut down. I'm going to show you the next day. If I came back, I could hit Design Sew Existing, and it would bring back the project again. But I want to show you a different type of design. So I'm going to hit Reset. We're going to use a Pantograph again and enter the rectangle manually. I will use the same set of dimensions, 60 by 80, and continue, and hit Finished. And we're going to go back to the Urban Elements folder, and the first one I'm going to use is called Celtic Maze. Is here, and I'll hit continue. And because we have even and odd rows, we can actually select two different patterns on the IntelliQuilter. I'm not sure if all systems do that. The second one I'm going to use is called Feather Meander, so I can just select F and go to Feather Meander and continue. And so you can see we have two different patterns here, and there is a slight little bit of overlap, so you could change that if you wanted to. Now you can see you're starting to get some white there, so you could either have the overlap in some areas or have more white. Depends on how you like it. But also we could go back and decrease the size a little bit, so we get the size back down a little bit more to the original size of the Feather Meander, so that we make sure that the size would fit our throat space. And this just shows you that you can combine two different designs in the same thing, just to give it a more modern look or a different look if you're looking for something a little more original in your quilting. Something that might be interesting to do with this would be to actually also alternate the thread colors when you did alternate back and forth on the different rows. So you could hit Finished and accept the transition type. Do panto sequencing again. And there you have it again, alternating rows, two different patterns, and we could preview that just to show you what it looks like. And basically that is the process for loading a design on the IntelliQuilter. It is very intuitive, it's very simple, and it's very quick. and it allows you for a lot of choices. Of course, there are a lot of other things you can do with it after you get going, but that is pretty much the basics. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below, and we look forward to seeing you again next time in the studio.